Good afternoon. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to this event on the report, Completing Europe from the North-South Corridor to Energy, Transportation, and Telecommunications Union. I often like to tell people that the Atlantic Council is not a place where we publish reports that gather dust on shelves. And if there's ever an example of a report like that, it's this one, where it has generated a huge amount of excitement in Brussels, also in the interagency community here in the United States. Businesses looking at it, private equity is looking at it. This is a report that has a prioritization of projects. It's a report that starts from the standpoint that we need public-private partnerships, and it engages people in the report, as you'll see through the report, who get things done. Within that spirit, I'd like to offer a special word of welcome to our speakers, to the guests we have here today, and to our audience also watching online in our live webcast in Europe, here in the United States, and elsewhere. I'd also like to encourage everyone to join our conversation on Twitter using @ACEurasia and using the hashtag #ACEurope. One of the principal goals that the Atlantic Council is building and promoting the concept of a Europe whole and free, and that was the case even before that whole concept came under new threat. The vision of a Europe whole and free and at peace is under pressure, which has been a bipartisan vision in the United States, and a continuing and consistent transatlantic vision is under pressure from within and outside its borders. Political and economic issues challenge European unity, while the EU deals with external threats from the east and from the south. The future of the European Union is at stake, and that, of course, has serious implications for the transatlantic community, for America's role in the world. The Atlantic Council and Central Europe Energy Partners published the Completing Europe report to highlight a critical element in the process of addressing those weaknesses and completing Europe. Infrastructure development across Central Europe in the energy, transportation, and telecommunications sectors. As an integrated set of energy, transportation, and digital links spanning from the Baltic to the Adriatic and Black Seas, the North-South Corridor is critical to the creation of a single European market, a cornerstone to the vision of a united Europe. This study is structured around those three dimensions of North-South Corridor and complements them with a fourth: how to address the financial requirements of infrastructure investments. This report was initially released in Istanbul last November. We now see a prioritization taking place at the EU level of transatlantic energy projects. We're seeing a prioritization taking place at the US level. We're seeing real action in this dream of a much more active transatlantic energy relationship, and of course what we've been talking about is a north-south corridor. We're delighted to have the co-chairman who oversaw this report, General Jim Jones and Mr. Paweł Olechnowicz, with us today. General Jones, former National Security Advisor to U.S. President Barack Obama, former Supreme Allied Commander Europe, and consistently one of the leaders in thinking strategically about the role of energy in our foreign policy and in the world, has been at the forefront of answering challenges facing the transatlantic community in his military and civilian capacities throughout his distinguished public service. He serves as chairman of the Atlantic Council's Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security. We launched this report at our Istanbul summit last November and presented it at a high-level roundtable and discussion in Brussels last month that featured Vice President of the European Commission for the Energy Union, Maroš Šefčovič, the European Parliament's Industry and Energy Committee's chairman, and former European Parliament President Jerzy Buzek, as well as Mr. Olechnowicz and Jan Kulczyk, another key architect and supporter of the report. After the two co-chairmen share their thoughts, We'll have a moderated discussion with David Korani, Director of the Eurasia Energy Futures Initiative here at the Atlantic Council. Before I pass to Paweł, let me thank our partners at CEED and at CEEP. Janusz Lux is here. It's great to have you here, and of course our partners at Lotos. I want to tip my hat to Jan Kulczyk, one of the architects of the report, supporter of the report, and Jark Schroeke. It's great to see you here as well, Jark. Please send our best wishes back to Jan as well. Now, without further delay, let's hear from our distinguished guest today on the North-South Corridor. Mr. Olechnowicz, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Fred. General Jones, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Personally, I want to thank the Atlantic Council and Fred hosting us here, but even more, I am going to thank that we have created some kind of a good friendship. And that's why we are here to present also the report. So the few words I'm going to deliver to you that's regarding this report, but no, I'm not going to let's say, go too deeply on that report. The report is rather the kind of a suggestion for Europe and favorably for the better relationship, the business and trading relationship with the US and the EU. And it's really coming on a good time that you will getting, that information here today. You will have your own opinion once we may be able to answer your questions if you have. But in generally, what I'm going to say, the Central Europe is today well aware about energy needs, diversifying access to supplies and pursuing energy efficient policy. Increased regional cooperation leads to greater energy security, potential access to EU funding, and the ability to identify and carry through priorities projects in Central Europe. So, growing insecurity over Russia's rising confrontation with the West and Russia's unprecedented assault of Ukraine requires solidarity and collaboration with partners beyond the usual existing boundaries. So the Europe need and the future needs it to be interconnected. We have to be better organized to create as a, idea for that kind of existing structure in that world. European Union members, the one model for the existence. It means that we have to diversify energy supplies. We have to think about the whole economy development based on the one, let's say, good regulations and the rules. And we have to be well structured and consistent, having, representing the one model into others in that world. And it's good to have the friends around, especially we've been talking about the US and NATO. So that's why we decided with Atlantic Council to prepare the report which we represent today, which is the name of that report is Completing Europe. The why we've been putting that, because we are quite divided to two parts, two regions. One is more mature countries, or mature countries, with somebody say EU 15, and the rest EU 11. It's a Central European countries. We know that's why, but we are much weaker in that region, CE region, economically than that more matures. That's 1/3 of GDP only of that mature region. So we have to think about in Europe, if we want to stay as a bloc of 28 countries for a longer time, how to survive, how to live together. We have to shrink the gap, economical gap between one and another regions. And what do we need? We need to have the same infrastructure. We have to create a kind of a energy security policy. We've been talking about Energy Europe. And finally, the last month, the European Commission approved it, that direction. It means that our report is well fitting here, though, what's going on at the EU, the highest level, and will be also the kind of a material for further discussion about different kind of projects, because we've been delivering idea for reindustrialization of Europe. We've been delivering idea to build energy. Energy means pipelines of the gas and crude oil, going from the Baltic Sea down to through the countries like Slovakia, Czechia, Czech Republic, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, to Croatia. That also covering Balkan Peninsula, non-EU members, and Turkish energy hub, and not forgetting business alliances with our friends, Ukraine and Moldova. So we've been talking also about the transportation corridor, means more efficient roads and railways, and we've been talking about telecommunication. In general, we need better communication and transportation. And it's nothing against, our more mature economies within that Europe. It's after the completion of that picture and the CEE block, with engagement of that more mature partners, we will connect that part of Europe with existing high level and efficient infrastructure. So it means that by that definition that we are going to create, that completing Europe north-south corridor for energy, transportation, and telecommunication, we are going to psychologically get together with an existing network in the whole Europe, and then create one idea to be stronger towards, others in that world. Why, you may ask me, why we are here in Washington? First of all, the fact that we are together with Atlantic Council base here, and I am proud of that. But also, it's a good time that EU, it's, I dream about that finishing, TTIP negotiation. It means that's a kind of a general model for a future cooperation, trading, and technology flow, and a business better relationship defined by rules between EU and the US. So that's not the case, that we will put on that discussion that this is gas and LNG ideas. By the way, we're not talking about when we are touching, LNG and gas which should be supplied from America to Europe, that we are asking for the gas which might be much, much cheaper. This is based on a, commercial model. But we've been talking about a diversification of a supply. We've been talking about a serious and defined new partners who are strong enough in that world and who may bring us to the position that we are less dependent on the one players. That's the reason that we've been talking about here, about the gas and about other things. Also, the projects which it says nothing new because it's a completion of existing on EU level projects like PCI, like new idea of President Juncker's over 300 billion euros worth. Many projects inside, but we've been talking about strategic actions which has to be taken, bringing the kind of a logic regulation for players, like many of us being here, and like myself, as a CEO of a company, oil and gas in Poland, who've been waiting for, logic model and the money available for a further development. So we've been expecting to also partners from the US, who, for a future collaboration. And that's more or less what I wanted to say, giving you the kind of a background regarding, why we are here and what we've been, what we've prepared to present here, and we are open for further discussion if you want to have it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paweł. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to see you here. We do have some empty seats, but it just goes to show that the educated part of Washington is here today, and we need to do some more work. I have rarely been as excited about any project that I've been able to participate with in my life as I am this one. This project, completing Europe from the north-south corridor to energy, transportation, and telecommunications union, is really emblematic of the times that we live in. If we're successful in doing this, and I'm not Pollyannish about the degree of difficulty here. Frankly, I would have rather started with a smaller proof of concept than something this big. But this is a very, very key project that cuts across all kinds of discipline in the vast field of international relations. For one thing, it's emblematic of the fact that the 21st century energy security challenges is right up there with any other challenge that we face. Military, cybersecurity, you name it. It's representative also of the fact that in order to successfully engage in this new century, still new century of ours, that governments are going to have to bend their stovepipes towards the middle and find better ways to cooperate in a more cohesive way across all aspects of conventional and non-conventional threats. Energy security is as important as anything that we face, not just in the United States, but globally. And we see it played out on the world stage right now with Russia's aggressive behavior of and tendency to use energy as, if you will, a 21st century weapon. U.S. policy with regard to energy is far more, how shall we say, collegial. I think that our newfound wealth in energy should not be misinterpreted that we intend to use it as a club. That's not our way. But it does give us a new opportunity to engage the transatlantic link, to embolden it, to reaffirm it, and to do something I think is quite important, not only in Europe and the United States, but also in terms of sending a message to the world about the criticality of energy in the 21st century. And by the way, when I say energy, I associate the word climate with that as well. Those who have an abundance of energy on this planet are fortunate and should use it wisely, and those who don't obviously need it, particularly the developing world. And I think it's almost a moral imperative that we have here in the United States and with the developed countries in Europe to use that precious asset wisely for the benefit of even reaching out to defeat the ravages of radical fundamentalism that is at work all over the place. Because if you don't have energy, you have problems. And those that have it, and those who have the energy technology, I think, are morally constrained to share that with developing parts of the world and to show the people of different parts of the developing world that there are opportunities to be optimistic, that their children and grandchildren will have a better future than they had. So I'd like to acknowledge the Atlantic Council for its wisdom in championing this project. I am honored to be partnered with my friend Paweł and his colleagues, as well as our team here in Washington. This is a movement that is coordinated but taking place on the European continent in real time as it is here in the United States. It is a transatlantic security issue, it is a transatlantic economic issue, and it has strategic overtones that will send messages to national leaders who want to use energy as a club rather than an asset. It also ushers in, I think, an era that we're potentially going to capitalize on that I would refer to as commercial diplomacy. Whereas in the past, in say the 20th century, U.S. policy, security policy has been dominated by the Defense Department, perhaps the National Security Council, and a little bit of the State Department. I think to be effective in this century, which is certainly much more multipolar than the last one was, and certainly much more economic in terms of challenges, you're going to have a whole-of-government approach to solving or even attempting to solve some of the world's problems. And this application of combined forces, if you will, not only governmental but private sector forces working with a private and public partnership is really exciting, and that gets organizations like the Department of Commerce, the Department of Energy, the Department of State, the Department of Defense, all working cohesively on a single project. So as Paweł correctly pointed out, this isn't just an energy corridor, it's energy, telecommunications, and transportation. This isn't a project that is destined to either succeed or fail on the totality of the project. I can see scenarios where you do the easy parts first and do the harder parts last, and there's different ways to do this. We're still very much in the, I'd say, we're no longer at the crawl stage, we're probably at the walk stage. We're having important meetings here in Washington with the public sector and the private sector in the coming few days. They're having meetings in Europe as well, and at some point we'll bring both sides together and get this on the way. As Fred Kemp pointed out, this was announced at the Istanbul summit, which there will be another one this year. And our Secretary of Energy has already announced that he intends to attend. And I think that summit, Fred, will be an important, another important milestone in this project. I think it's also reflective of a formula that perhaps we should think about in terms of global peace and prosperity that basically suggests that in the 21st century, security in the traditional sense in and of itself is not enough to cause change, but if you take security, attach economic development and the practices of good government and rule of law, then you really have a chance, I think, of making a long-term difference. And this is where the harmony between different ministries and agencies, if they were able to come together and work together towards a common end, we can be much more successful in the field of foreign policy than we otherwise would be. So this project affects about 13 countries directly, but really affects all of Europe indirectly, and of course the United States, and has spillovers beyond that. I mentioned that as a strategic response, it's not intended to be a strategic response necessarily to Mr. Putin and his actions, but it has the added effect of sending a message, if it's successful, that there are long-term consequences for the kind of actions that Russia took in Crimea and is now taking in eastern Ukraine. So all of those things put together give us, I think, a great opportunity, reason for optimism. It's an ambitious project, without question. Its public and private complexities would discourage most normal people, but since we're not normal people, we're going to be encouraged, and we're going to go forward, and we're going to try to do some good things here. I want to thank, again, everyone for being here today, and I look forward to answering any questions along with my partner, Paweł, and David. You're going to moderate the discussion, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you, General Jones. Thank you, Chairman Olechnowicz. That was a great start to our conversation. General, you emphasized the importance of implementation, that this is a case where the strategic rationale is there. You have a Russia that is threatening Europe. You have an incomplete integration in the East that is also vitally important for the whole of the continent and for the economic rebound of the continent. And yet you have an agency problem in as much as you actually have to put together the stakeholders in a way to get things going. So we are focusing, we launched the report in November, we launched it in Brussels in March, now we're launching it in Washington. And we are going to focus on various European capitals, but also the business community, as you both emphasized, to bring in all those commercial players that will be interested in making this into a reality. And as you said, there are many different ways to parse it out, and there are more difficult components and there are easier components. What we suggest in the report is that we focus on several critically and strategically important components that must be prioritized and supported by public funding. Public funding that is extremely limited, as you all know. And we have to focus on those very limited public funds to get difficult but yet strategically important projects up and running as soon as possible. But we also talked about in a previous conversation about, if you talk about the energy picture and gas in particular, it's great that you have all these interconnectors and the infrastructure in place and the missing pieces put in place in the next couple of years. But you also need additional gas to fill that infrastructure. And that's my first question to both of you. So where is that gas going to come from? Is it going to come from the United States in the form of LNG? Is it going to come via pipeline through the Southern Gas Corridor? So what are the most promising prospects in terms of diversification, also to reduce the dependency, particularly the continent's east, on Russian gas. So, General, if you would like to go first.
From the U.S. perspective, one of the things that I most enjoyed doing when I was a national security advisor was working on the idea of export control reform being absolutely necessary for the United States to be as competitive as it could be in the 21st century. I see this century as being very economically driven, and things like energy security, as I've said, are at the top of the list. So the U.S., despite its newfound wealth in energy, is now going to have to play catch up on the within the legal framework of changing and modifying what laws need to be changed, what policies need to be changed, and frankly, we need to do this as quickly as we can. I can't imagine that the United States would not become a net exporter of energy, be it gas or oil, in the near future. I know that we're rapidly turning around the LNG terminals that we were building to import LNG. Now we're modifying them to export, which is, I think, very good. And there are other sources as well globally that could be used to feed the corridor. But I want to emphasize that on the financing of it, here in the U.S. side, we're going to take a very serious and aggressive stance at both public and private funds. We have within our group representatives of the private sector, private equity in particular. We're working hard to understand what it is they need to feel comfortable to make investments, what is it that mitigates risk, and we're going to do that very aggressively. And we have a series of meetings between now and November of this year in Istanbul, where both in Europe and in the United States we'll be able to answer those very legitimate and reasonable questions.
Thank you. Paweł?
Yeah, I have a simple answer. You know, why I'm here, I would wish U.S. starts delivering gas to Europe, but you know, this is not like a topic aim of that report. Europe in general, we've been observing, needs, as we put it, to be completed, means needs to have own implemented rules and regulations. And in general, economically speaking, you know, that we need, you know, to be less dependent on the one players. This not absolutely. If you've been thinking that it's just you know, something you know, against the players today, it's absolutely not. We've been, you know, in a position to stay for as long as possible in that world, you know, the relationship, business relationship with Russia and Russian companies. But as we've been observing that, you know, energy today is used as a weapon for another actions and tactics, we have to be less dependent on it. So we've been looking for a different partnership, and of course the US is welcome to be that partner. Of course we have to develop ourselves. That's why we need a new idea, new projects, new infrastructure, interconnectors, but we have to focus on also to develop our own resources, indigenous resources. That's including shale gas, and we need to communicate with the US and to get together, talking about know-how, technology, and get a friendship. Of course, like, you know, that's all. I'm not talking about Poland, but Poland is the best known for me. We need to implement internally the let's say, good regulation for investors. This is a long-term strategy, as you know how long it takes here in the US to develop unconventional gas. It takes some years. We started a few years, 5 years ago in Poland, and in Europe. It needs another years to go, but based on experience done here, we may get together and find that things may happen faster. And we have to think about a long-term strategy for talking about indigenous sources of energy. What about we may do with coal? As a big discussion is going on. And whether you know or not, the CO2 per capita in Poland is lower than in Germany. So therefore, we have to be fair, talking about CO2 reduction, using first of all, the idea of a new technology. Means we have to go for something which may give the chance to continue the same, let's say, using the same sources of energy, but we may use the newest technology, which may bring us to the higher efficiency and the better, less polluted, technology. So therefore, there are many things within, inside Europe, but we've been talking to, outside as well about new coming technology. We've been thinking, talking about trading and transatlantic trading, investment partnership, that negotiation. We've been thinking about the future of that. What should be put in to get by two partners something out of that? Otherwise, there is a nonsense, to think about the long-term new treaty, new ideas. So something for EU to be better and something for the US. That's the same. So therefore, there are many things to think about new technology, about the nuclear energy. What should be done with that? And renewable sources of energy, that's how to focus on that, how to develop, and how to network each other's, how to get a partnership. This is in my opinion, the biggest problem we've been observing that this is a communication. It's understanding it. Sometimes, that very often we've been thinking about something which may solve my problem. Let's get together with a neighbor, okay? I am getting gas, so I am secured. What about another one? If we are united, and if we want to be united, and we sign the agreement, we have to think, commonly about all of the partners. And that's kind of original, assessment, adjustment towards new situation. That's, what's going on in that world. We've been observing, we are sitting in that, so we have to react, and we have to think about a new model for Europe and partnership for with the US as well. Not thinking about the NATO and military troops, weapons coming. We have to think about economy development. This is the best weapon and friendly. Not destroying, but building, our future.
Thank you, Paweł. Since we have limited time left, about 10 minutes, so let me throw the floor open. If you could please identify yourself and limit yourself to one, maximum 2 questions. Dana, please.
Thank you. It's Dana Marsh with Transnational Strategy Group. I wanted to ask you on one recommendation. I'm afraid I've just gotten the report, so haven't had a chance to study it, but I did note one of your top recommendations on gas is on moving ahead on the Kirk Island, Croatia project. You were mentioning in the report concern of delays in moving that forward. I wonder if you've considered looking at the possibility of a floating LNG import facility. There's something like what we have next door in Lithuania, comparing the Lithuania experience, frankly, with the onshore LNG regas facility in Poland. Perhaps you could speak a little bit. I know that's maybe a very narrow question, but it does bear on some of the questions of timing and costs and flexibility.
Personally, I love to talk about real projects. But the whole program and the report is covering, much wider, all of the, small projects which have to be inside, and that's including network for, the whole infrastructure, the gas pipeline going from the north down to Croatia, as you mentioned. It's, the Kirk storages and logistic projects is under construction, being a long postponement. Same we have in Poland, for example, but we will finish this year projects, on the coast of Świnoujście, so being ready to transform the gas down through the more efficient existing pipelines, which may go through Poland down to Croatia. And we have to think also, it's not really fully constructed yet, but we should think about the reverse, the gas coming from down up to the north. So, and then the system, we may say that if that's completed, secure all of the players, existing on that. So it's, as you know, much has to be done, but from the level of the, let's say, EU, the decision should be taken and supported to Croatian and somebody taking care of that, about that project development in Croatia. And then links together, that pipelines, going through from Croatia, Hungary, Bulgaria, up to Poland and back. So of course, decision makers are well defined. But it has to be taken as considered as important, something which must be decided now. Otherwise, we'll still think and talk about it. I am rather sure that climate is positive today for concrete projects coming. That's it.
John. It's something we've looked at. My friend Jan Boyer is here, and last year we engaged with the Turkish government, for example, about the idea of a floating platform going through the Straits and up into the Black Sea. It wasn't widely received. It was a very difficult thing to do. But, that's not to say that's something that we should totally disregard. I think it has some merits, and we should look into it as part of a more holistic approach to how we're going to solve the problem.
Is there an opportunity, another phase of the work where some ideas like this might
Oh, yeah, sure. It's ongoing. So, there are milestones in terms of the European conferences that we'll be attending. I would say the big one will be November, but there's one in Poland also coming up. But the Atlantic Council is permanently on board with this. We are easy to get a hold of. Happy to consider any helpful ideas.
If I may add to that, the trick with the Croatian LNG terminal is this. So if you look at Europe as a whole, you have a vast overcapacity of LNG import terminals. You have about 200 billion cubic meters per year, and then they were utilized up to 35% maybe last year. So if you look at the picture as a whole, we are fine. The problem is that the geographical distribution of those terminals is quite uneven. So all those terminals, with the exception of Świnoujście, will be very soon ready, and the Lithuanian floating terminal are in the west. So the question is twofold. One is that whether you can have enough public funding to get the Croatian terminal up and running. That would be my first priority, because otherwise commercially it will be difficult to justify another terminal again. The second is, if you think about what's happening and what we are also promoting in the report, is to interconnect the market. So it actually doesn't matter whether the LNG arrives to Croatia or it arrives to Spain, because if it's a truly interconnected market, if there are no destination clauses, if there are no limits to the free flow of gas within the European gas market, then the gas shipment could easily arrive from the US to Spain, and then through swap deals, you can buy it in Croatia or in Hungary for that matter. So beyond a certain point, while I'm still a big fan of the Croatian LNG project, you may have to be a bit more realistic. If there is no significant public funding available, then you might be better off to connecting the whole region to the west better, and then enabling that the free flow of gas is happening. We have time for about 2 more questions, very briefly. Please, sir.
Thank you. George Mihails from Multi-Defense, Norway. How do you relate this project to TTIP ongoing negotiations?
Well, go ahead, Paweł.
Thank you first.
No, I mean, I think it's
It's easier from the American side.
no, I think it's an integral part of the project. I don't think it's either or. I think it's an example of the kind of economic relationship that we should develop. I know the U.S. Trade Rep is aware of this project. I know the Secretary of Commerce is very, very supportive of it. As a matter of fact, the Department of Commerce is going to take a lead in hosting a interagency and private sector discussion on Friday of this week to talk about this project, not in isolation of TTIP, but as a holistic part of it.
Yeah, I'm only going to say I don't know, but because there are issues for the negotiator, but we presented our project, which was very well received on a high level of the Commission in Brussels 3 weeks ago. So and President Stefčovič and Jerzy Buzek and others, they told that report is going to be taken as an important one for negotiation part of energy issues for TTIP. Okay, it's quite fresh. It's going to be a transfer for further kind of action plan which is going to be prepared.
Great. One more question. Anya, please.
Anya Grigas, Occidental College. So a quick question again about supply. So as David mentioned, we've had LNG terminals in Western Europe for years, and also Qatar has been the largest LNG exporter also for years. Despite those both facts, Western Europe has been increasingly relying on Russian sources of gas. So could you maybe give some thoughts to this, and what can we expect to change going forward?
First,
I will try to touch that as what is logic and what is unlogic for that kind of a infrastructure network. Yeah? The logically it's to be secured. Okay, and we are not secure in Europe, so we have to have our own infrastructure, our own storages, our LNG terminals. You see that what's happened in Klaipėda. I remember when the Lithuanian minister, delivered the public the message that Lithuania wants to build the LNG terminal, and even the Polish reaction, the negative. That's a kind of a stupid way, Do we need much more terminals, in the Baltic Sea? And we have Klaipėda. it works, and it's, in my opinion, needed. And we'll have the Świnoujście, much bigger terminal, and most probably we'll have, in the Baltic Sea, 2 additional or 3 additional terminals. And each of them will be economically viable, and the logic. So we have to have the pipelines networks, or let's say the idea to transmit favorably, that gas from terminals, okay? So therefore, all of the infrastructure must be agreed between the partners, neighbors, and be constructed. That's only this one, because, the gas is available. There is no problem in that world. It's a question who is going to be the partner, to sell it and deliver it, and whether we do have in that world the danger more and the less risky area to, let's say, defined as risky for our economy, sitting in Europe, risky for our economy, sitting, let's say, North Europe, down Europe, and how to secure each other once we are, within one structure, as a EU model. We shouldn't continue the old system that we are not, we are secured enough because we have individual partnership with the players. Who is making the problem for my neighbor sometimes, yeah? If we are not connected. That's the logic I've been, let's say, thinking about that. So, where the other too many projects we do have on the pipelines, too many wishes, of course, we have to think about that. It is a totally different issue. I ask myself, do we need nuclear power plant which is covering not only one small country, but additional 3 or 4? Do we need to build in one small and, spend a hell of a money for such an investment? That's a question, for such a logic, if that logic organization exists, like EU, for the players to define and to decide what is going to be done and where.
If I may, just 2 points on that excellent question. One is, in my mind, the name of the game is not to get rid of Russian gas completely. The name of the game is to put them in a competitive position so that they have to compete and they are not in a monopoly position. And in Lithuania, it's a prime example. They won't import, as you know very well, all of their gas from now on via LNG, but they used the LNG terminal to diversify the supplies and then renegotiate the contract with Gazprom. And Gazprom, because the country had a leverage, had to give a substantial price discount, so the gas is cheaper. And that's also part of the answer to your question, is that Gazprom actually, because of the competition, partly represented by LNG, was in a position to give, or had to give, significant price discounts. So, simply put it, Russian gas was cheaper, so these countries who are well diversified just used Russian gas, and I think it's fine. That's not necessarily the name of the game to get completely rid of Russian gas, so that's important. And the second issue is the availability of LNG supplies. If you look at it in the past 5 years or so, and then if you look ahead 5 years, 10 years from now, the LNG market globally will dramatically expand. So it will be a much larger pool of resources you will be able to tap into, as it was the case in the past 5 to 10 years. So that's also probably increase, on the other hand, the supplies, and will make them cheaper on the European market. With that, we unfortunately ran out of time. It was a great discussion. Thank you, Chairman Olechnowicz. Thank you, General Jones, for your leadership, for your guidance on the report. This is, again, just the beginning. We have a lot of work to do. We will be out there to make this a reality. All your feedbacks would be very welcome. This is very much a project under construction. So if you have any ideas, constructive feedback, then please feel to email us or talk to us about it.